It's April 2023. So what are we going to talk about? The November 2024 presidential election, of course. So we got lots of different things to talk about regarding the presidential election. We have Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Robert Kennedy Jr., Tucker Carlson, maybe, and others. That's what we're going to talk about today on Crisis Point. Hello, I'm Eric Sammons, your host and editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine. Before we get started, encourage everybody to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, follow us on social media at Crisis Mag. That's at Crisis Mag. Okay, so I want to talk about politics. At Crisis, we cover both the church and politics. I have found that most of our audience are more interested in the church part of it, the church politics and things like that. But we definitely want to cover politics because it impacts us as Catholics who are trying to live in this world. The political system that we live in matters. And of course, most of our audience is American. And even those who aren't American know how much America influences the rest of the world. So I think it's important that we talk about it, even for our overseas audience or Canadians or what have you. So first, I just want to make a couple things clear. In general, at Crisis, we are conservative in the sense that we support basically conservative politics. But my own politics are a little bit outside of that conservative mainstream, I admit. And I've been told often by people who follow us. But also, I think one thing that I've come to realize is that there is no Catholic position when it comes to politics in the sense of a hardcore, this is what all Catholics must believe when it comes to prudential political matters. So I take that very seriously. At Crisis, we try to run articles that have various viewpoints when it comes to politics, all within a certain Catholic viewpoint. Obviously, a Catholic cannot support a legalized abortion. But there are instances where a Catholic could vote for a politician who might support legalized abortion. I mean, hopefully it doesn't happen too often, but it could happen, theoretically at least. And so I think we want to keep that in mind when we're talking about politics. Also, I think that fundamentally, I see more and more Catholics and non-Catholics, to be honest, becoming disillusioned with our entire political system. And I join them in that. I mean, I think not only the current American political system, which pits Democrats against Republicans, conservatives against liberals, but ultimately is often a uniparty system. I mean, the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats is not as big of a deal as it's made out to be. And I think it's made out to be by the establishment as a big deal because they want us fighting each other, because then we're not going to fight against them. They stay in power as long as we fight against each other. And so I really do think that our political system, our current American political system, is very much a uniparty system that in general, your average Republican politician is not going to be that different in what he ends up accomplishing and doing than your average Democrat. Now, are there exceptions? Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Ron Paul was the big exception for Republicans a while back. Donald Trump, I think, is somewhat of an exception, not as big as some of his supporters would like to think, but he is somewhat of an exception to that rule. I also think, though, that they're few and far between. Your average, for example, Republican congressman is not going to rock the boat. He is not going to push, for example, hard against transgenderism. He's not going to push hard against homosexual marriage or even against abortion, frankly. And likewise, your typical Democrat congressman or woman is going to support the current thing, and they're going to support, like, for example, war in Ukraine just as much as a Republican will. They're going to support basically just doing what we continue to do, pushing the envelope a little bit more than a Republican. So ultimately, I do think that's a big point that we need to recognize, that when we talk about, and I'm going to talk about the Democrats and Republicans and people like that, there's not a lot of as much difference as it's made out to be between them. But I want to go a little bit deeper for a minute and say that I think we need to start recognizing the fundamentally flawed nature of our government system, i.e. the Democratic Republic. Because what we're seeing is, in real time, we're seeing the ultimate result of democracy, which is eventually leads to a totalitarianism. And I think somebody call it a narco tyranny, a narco tyranny. Like it's anarchy in one sense, but it's also tyranny in another, that we're ruled by interests that are not on our side. We're ruled by elites that hate us and that basically just bring power onto themselves. And we're ruled by a corporate government marriage, incestual marriage, which works to keep us out of power and keep us down and keep them in power. So I really feel like we need to question everything as Catholics in America. We can't just blindly support our system because that's what we've done for about 250 years. The fact is that if you look around as a Catholic, how can you not see that things are fundamentally broken in this country? I mean, COVID, if COVID didn't wake you up to how broken things are, I don't know what will. The fact that governors throughout this country could basically just declare martial law by saying, hey, I declare there's emergency, and therefore I have all the power I want. That's insane. Nobody voted for that. They didn't even, in any, I don't think any state that I know of did the state Senate or state House actually vote to give those powers to their governor. They just went along with it. I know here in Ohio, that's what happened. I know that's what happened, I think, most states. And that's insane. A system where a governor or president can just simply declare an emergency under his own power, giving himself ultimate power, is, first of all, it's not a democracy. I mean, those who criticize what came before us, like monarchies, well, that's far superior. Monarchs have far less power in history than your typical governor did during COVID. And so I think we really need to look at that and recognize how fundamentally flawed. So that being said, I don't really have a problem with Catholics who don't vote or who vote third party. I don't think there's a moral obligation that you have to vote for the Democrat or the Republican, or even for a third party for that matter. I don't think there's any moral obligation to do that. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as I talk about this, the current setup for the 2024 presidential election. Now, that all being said, this is the system we're in. I personally think we could and should work to overthrow that system in some way and establish a better one. But that doesn't happen overnight, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. And so therefore, I acknowledge we're in the system we're in. We might as well work for the best people we can in that system. So I likely will vote in the 2024 election. And I don't have a problem, obviously, with somebody who does vote in the 2024 election. I just don't think it's required that you do that. Okay, so that being said, what are the biggest issues that in my opinion, what are the biggest issues that we should be looking at when it comes to the presidential election? I know most conservative Catholic outlets are first thing they're going to say is abortion. And I know I'm going to be called a heretic for this, but I don't think that's the case. I think abortion is important. I think abortion is the most important moral issue of the day, and I think it's a Holocaust. I'm far more radical on abortion than your average Catholic is. Trust me. I think we should be doing everything we can to end abortion. That being said, as a voting issue in 2024, I don't necessarily see it as the most important issue. For example, between DeSantis and Trump. And we'll talk about them specifically here in a moment. But I feel like one of the issues that matters is the simple question: does the candidate hate you? Because what we've seen is, for example, in 2016, Hillary Clinton, she hated you. If you were a crisis reader, somebody in the crisis audience, she found you deplorable and she hated you. Donald Trump for all his flaws, and I've talked about him before, and I think there's far more than I've even talked about, he doesn't hate us. That's an important point. 2020, the same thing. Joe Biden, or at least Joe Biden's team, because hard to know what Joe Biden himself thinks. Joe Biden, he hates you. He hates what you stand for. He wants to destroy everything you stood for. You stand for it. Donald Trump doesn't. And so in 2024, I think that's a big issue. Does the candidate hate you? And I think that's something to consider and understand that somebody like Joe Biden hates you. What I mean by that is he wants to, and he works towards destroying everything that you think is important, your entire way of life. He would be happy if it ceased to exist. And I think he'd be happy throwing you in jail just for simply the way you live. Homeschooling, believing in God, things of that nature, believing that men cannot be women and vice versa. So I think that's something that we need to take consideration. I also think that what I would call the woke regime is probably one of the other very important issues in our country today. What I mean by that is, it used to be called political correctness. Now it's really called woke. And I think it's more than it was a political correctness. Political correctness was talking about, okay, certain speech is regulated, like on campuses and things like that. But now with woke, it's much more the idea of not it's only speech regulated, but you need to give your assent to what they're saying you have to believe in. So before it's like you couldn't say, here's an example. I went to a college whose mascot was Redskins. And it was something, and you were not allowed to, there was a big push that, let's not call it Redskins anymore. That's politically incorrect. That's offensive. And so eventually they did change. After I had left, they did change the mascot to Red Hawks from Redskins. That was political correctness. But now what they're saying is, not only do you have to call somebody who's a man a woman if you want you to call them a woman, you must accept that that's reality. If you do not accept that's reality, you will lose your job. You may lose custody of your kids. You will lose everything you hold dear if you do not accept the lie that they're going to tell you. They know it's a lie. They know you know it's a lie. They know that you know that they know it's a lie, but you have to publicly accept the lie or else you will lose everything dear to you. That's the woke regime. And that is the Democratic Party. And that is Joe Biden and everything he stands for. It's the woke regime. They're pushing it. This is what the woke regime's mouthpieces, which is the Hollywood, the mainstream media, academia, and government, they all stand for. And so I really think that anybody who is willing to stand up to the woke regime, I think we should at least listen to them and give them a chance. Now, and I'll go through the candidates here in a minute. I also think the role of the federal government versus the role of the states is a very important issue. I am openly 100% in support of secession. I think that states should secede from the United States. I do not think that a 50-state union with 330 million people can be governed by a single government. And I think all I have to do to prove that is say, look out the window. Look at a news site, and you will know that is not possible anymore. We are too big to succeed. And so I do think we should be broken up. That being said, I also acknowledge we're not breaking up tomorrow. There's not enough support for secession among Americans. I know that. However, we do need to push towards more federalism, i.e., more states' powers. States should be exercising their rights, their authority, their power far more than they do now. And so anybody who's running for president should be, in my mind, supportive of less power to the federal government. And that's somewhat of an oxymoron if you think about it, somewhat of a paradox, I should say. Somebody who's running to be in charge of the federal government saying, I also want the federal government to be diminished. You're not going to find many that will really go through with that. I mean, so I think that's another big issue. I also think our international relations, I think that, for example, the war in Ukraine is a disaster. I've talked about that before in this podcast. We need to stop working to continue that war and start working to end that war, through peaceful negotiations. It's insane how we're saber rattling with China about Taiwan. And so I also think that people need to understand the military industrial complex and what it does, the power it has in this country, which is all part of the deep state and things like that. And so candidates should be aware of that. So these are issues I think are very important going into the 2024 election. So that being said, let me talk briefly about some of the candidates. So on the Democrat side, which I know probably most of my audience, as soon as they say that, they're going, well, I'm not voting for a Democrat. I get it. I'm not going to either. But at least let's talk about it, because there is something a bit interesting about the Democrat side this year. We obviously have Joe Biden, and I just saw a poll where 70% of Americans, including 51% of Democrats, don't think he should run in 2024. That's amazing for a sitting president. That's 70% of Americans, and a majority of his own party doesn't think he should run in 2024. Because obviously we know we have a weekend in Bernie's situation going on. Everybody knows he's not really in charge. He's just trotted out there. He's given some drugs, pumped some drugs into him, and have him say, say a few things that they want him to say. But who runs it? We don't really know who's actually running our government right now. And so a lot of people don't want Biden to run. And so if Biden runs, though, which I think it sounds like he will, I think he's got the nomination locked up, because the Democrats have shown. I mean, the funny thing is, the Democrats, Obama, yes, first black president, but other than that, they run establishment people every year. I mean, look at Biden, running, and look at Hillary. These are establishment people. People like Bernie Sanders, who also is establishment, but not quite as obvious about it. He's got no chance. And so I really don't think, I think Biden, if he goes for nomination, he'll get it. Now, what's interesting, though, is that Robert Kennedy Jr., the son of Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of the President John F. Kennedy, so the nephew of John F. Kennedy, he has announced his run for the Democratic nomination. Now, RFK Jr. is an interesting figure, because if you look him up on Wikipedia or the description they have on Google, it immediately says he's a anti-vaccine zealot and conspiracy theorist or something like that. I mean, he has no respect from the mainstream. And this is amazing considering he's a Kennedy. I mean, you have to give him credit for the fact that he could have coasted through life. I mean, he's RFK Jr. He's got money. He's got the name. He could have just simply coasted through life as a Kennedy, and he'd live a nice, happy life. Instead, what he's done is he has gone out of his way to buck the system, to buck the establishment, and to talk about things that nobody else wants to talk about, even though he knew he would get laughed at for it, he'd be ridiculed, and he wouldn't be part of the scene that his family is just naturally part of, which is the elites. I mean, it's that whole class of people. The Kennedys are in that, but he bucked it. He went against it. And so you have to give him credit for that. He is a true old school liberal. Like liberals today, people are called liberal today. They're not liberals in any historical sense of the term. They're totalitarians who just want to tell you what to do. I mean, they're the school marm who's just rapping your knuckles if you dare go against anything they might say. That's your liberal today. Kennedy, RFK Jr., however, is an old school liberal. So he does believe in government. He believes in government to solve things. He believes government is the best way to solve many problems, which obviously I, as a libertarian, very much disagree with him on. But I respect the fact that he has kept his old school liberal cred, so to speak. But what is amazing about RFK is, on the issues that matter the most, other than abortion, and I'm assuming he's pro-abortion, he is 100% right. He is talking about the unholy alliance between corporate and government interest. Because the fact is that we are living in a fascist system. What I mean by that is fascism is when corporate interests are used to promote the government and do what the government wants them to do. And that's exactly what we have today, because we have places like Facebook, YouTube, we had Twitter until recently. Obviously, the mainstream media, all the major corporations, we see that with Budweiser, what's happened recently with Budweiser, and all the major corporations are all 100% backing the woke regime and doing everything they can to censor anybody who's against it. And RFK Jr. sees it, and he's calling it out. Also, he's very right on the COVID regime. He, from the beginning, obviously, he's anti-vaccine in general. I mean, I think there are some vaccines he might not be against, but he questions their efficacy. But he was very much against the COVID vaccine from the beginning. But he's also is against lockdowns. He was against the mask mandates. He's against all these things that have been proven to fail, but have destroyed people's lives, particularly the middle class and the poor and the lower class. That's what's amazing is the liberals today are very much for the upper class. Because if you think about it, the whole COVID regime was very anti-middle class, very anti-lower class. And so you'd think by the stereotype, liberals today should be against it, right? No, they were the ones promoting it. The laptop class sat at their homes, got their food delivered to them, and they were fine. Where the working class stiff who's trying to make a living is told to stay at home, you can't make your income anymore that you need to support your family. Or the small business owner who's trying to take care of his family, he's probably middle class at best, his business is shut down. And when BLM comes into town and destroys his business, the liberals have nothing to say. But RFK Jr. is speaking out against it. And so I think that it's very important, his candidacy. He's also, I love the fact that he's for some things that are really outside the mainstream, but really need to be discussed. Like, for example, the rise in chronic health problems among our youth and among everybody that has to do with diet and it has to do with drugs. Nobody wants to talk about that, but the fact of the matter is, it is a strong creation of a health disaster in this country that we see today. And he wants to talk about that. And here's the thing. RFK might think things about vaccines I do not agree with. He might think things about medicine I think are kind of quacky myself. But I do know this. Just simply ignoring the issue and acting like there is no issue, no chronic health problems in this country, or it's just something that we can wave away because Big Pharma is going to take care of it, is just ludicrous. We need to challenge Big Pharma. We need to challenge the medical industrial complex. Actually, I have a podcast this week, an interview later this week called Challenging the Medical Industrial Complex. I think you're really going to watch this because it's from a doctor who is challenging that medical establishment. And RFK is bringing that stuff up. So I am 100% supportive of RFK Jr. running for president for the Democratic nomination, because I think the more people who talk about these things in the public eye, the better. I saw where to start off, 14% of Democrats are behind him, which is a huge number for an insurgency candidate like this. I mean, Pat Buchanan did not start off with that in 1992, and he did a lot to really undermine George H.W. Bush's campaign back then. Yes, I'm old enough to remember that. But RFK, so if he's already starting at 14%, I mean, it's possible his campaign will come to nothing. But I do like the fact that he's running. And here's something. If you told me you have two choices, you have to vote for either RFK Jr. or somebody like Mitt Romney, I'm voting for RFK Jr. Because even though Mitt Romney might say he's pro-life and RFK Jr. might say he's not, might say he's pro-choice or whatever, I know in practice, RFK Jr. is going to be a way better president than Mitt Romney would be. And so, I'm not saying I would vote for RFK Jr. if he's a Democrat nominee against somebody like, let's say, DeSantis, but I sure would vote for him over somebody like Mitt Romney, even though I've never voted for a Democrat in my life. I know I've never voted for a Democrat for president. I'm not sure if I've ever voted for a Democrat for any political office. If I have, it's maybe one or two very small candidates. Okay, so that's the Democrat side. I don't think anybody else is running. I think Biden's got the nomination wrapped up, but I'm really hoping and praying that RFK Jr. really does make a mess of the Democrat side and really brings these issues to fore, and hopefully maybe bring some of the old school liberals in the Democratic Party to recognize that the Democratic Party is in bed with the woke regime. I do think there are Democrats, old school Democrats, who are Democrat because their mom was Democrat or their dad was Democrat, their whole family's been Democrat, their union, whatever the case may be, who do not like the woke crap. And I think they just go along with Biden and the Democrats because there's no other option. They don't want to vote Republican. So maybe RFK Jr. stirs up in them something that has an impact on the Democratic Party. Okay, how about the Republican side? Obviously, the big name is Trump. He is the person to beat. There's no question. He is the front runner. I think so far, though, his campaign has been fascinating because I don't think it's been very successful, to be honest. He's had a few good things that have happened, but I don't think he's really resonating like he did. Obviously, not like he did in 2016, and not even like in 2020. I know here's what I've seen. I know a lot of people, friends of mine, who voted for Trump in 16, voted for Trump in 20. They really like Trump. They supported him greatly, but they have lost a lot of enthusiasm for him going into 2024. I mean, that's not me. I you know where I stand probably. I did not vote for him in 2016. I was never Trump. I changed my mind, voted for him in 2020. So I'm not saying about me. Obviously, if I'm not enthusiastic about Trump, it's because I've never been enthusiastic about Trump. I'm talking about people who had Trump signs on their cars, Trump signs in their house, in their yards. They campaigned for him. They voted very enthusiastically for him in 16 and 20, but now they're not enthusiastic about him. Now, they haven't necessarily left him, and they'll probably vote for him if he's the nominee in the presidential, in the general election, but they're not enthusiastic about him being the nominee. I think there's a lot of factors for that. I think there's just natural fatigue. There's the fact that he lost in 2020. I mean, his whole persona was based on him being a winner. Well, he's a loser now. I don't mean that like in a sense of like just calling him a loser. I mean that in a sense that he's lost an election. Now, I know there are some who question the whether or not that was legitimate or not, but the fact is a lot of people do just accept it at this point, and he lost that. And here's the other thing is, I think a lot of people, a lot of Trump supporters are huge DeSantis supporters, or what he's doing in Florida at least. They might even want to vote for Trump over DeSantis, but they love DeSantis, what he's doing in Florida. And so they just don't like him, Trump that is, attacking DeSantis. They don't understand why he's doing that. But this is Trump. This is the way Trump always campaigns. Scorched earth policy. You just destroy anybody that might be in your path. And he knows DeSantis is the biggest figure in his path. And so he's going to try to destroy him. But I do think it hurts him. I also think his actions during COVID really hurt him among a lot of his base, because a lot of his base are anti-COVID vaccine, anti-lockdowns, anti-mask mandates, all that stuff. And he supported all of it. He will try to rewrite history, but the fact is he supported lockdowns. He pushed the vaccine incredibly, and he still does to this day. And I think a lot of his hardcore supporters have lost their enthusiasm because of that. And so I think we need to recognize that. And I would just say to Trump supporters, he does not automatically get my vote or anybody's vote because of the Dobbs decision. At the same time, the Dobbs decision has to be a huge thing in his favor, a huge mark on his ledger for him. So I'm not saying we ignore it, but at the same time, that does not automatically mean I vote for Donald Trump in every single election he's in for the rest of his life. We have to consider going forward what's best, not necessarily just what he's done in the past. We take that in consideration, but that's not an automatic vote for him. Now, speaking of Republicans, though, and DeSantis, so DeSantis hasn't even declared he's running yet. So there's always a possibility he's going to step aside. I don't think he will, but I do think it's possible he will not run, because he might decide it's not going to be worth it to run against Trump right now. I'm just going to wait for 2028 when Trump's not going to run, or he's going to be too old, or he's going to have been president and can't run again, whatever the case may be. I think that is still possible. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's still possible. I personally think I like DeSantis a lot, and I think he's been a great governor in Florida. I personally think, though, in a way, I'd prefer him to remain governor of Florida. I'm not enthusiastic about Trump, but at the same time, because of what I was saying before, that I support secession, but I support federalism in general, the idea of let's give more power to the states. I think what DeSantis is doing in Florida is a model for every state. And I wish every state would be more like this. More governors would stand up to the federal government and say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go along with what you're saying we need to do. And I wish DeSantis would even go farther. I wish states would just start saying, yeah, we're going to ignore what the federal government tells us to do. We're just going to do our own thing. I think we need more of that. And so having DeSantis in Florida, I think helps be a model for other Republican governors and even Democrat governors. I mean, you see that, for example, Newsom in California, he's done a few things that are stupid, but he's basically, we're not going to go with the federal government either, because he'll point to DeSantis as an example. Like, he's going to do that. He's going to be against gun rights, wherever we're going to be pro-abortion, whatever the case may be. Now, the fact is, I think anything that weakens the power of the federal government is good long-term, even if it's bad short-term. So, for example, if a liberal blue governor does something to ignore the federal government, but it's a bad thing, I still think in a way that's long-term good, because what it does is it undermines the authority of the federal government, which I think is the key factor here that we need to push for. Now, another interesting possible candidate just occurred yesterday, and that's Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, of course, has been let go, parted ways, fired, left, whatever you want to call it, with Fox News. And so now he's a free agent. So already some people are like, could he run for president? Now, I did a poll on Twitter, and of course, this is super scientific. Should be taken as gospel. Okay, not really. 724 people. I had a relatively short time frame, so only 724 people voted. And you would think most of my followers are going to be Republican or conservative types. So I asked, who would you vote for in the GOP primary if these were the three candidates? Trump, DeSantis, Carlson. What I thought was interesting is DeSantis won with basically 48%. 48% of the voters said DeSantis. They'd pick DeSantis. But Tucker Carlson came in second. He got 32% of the vote, and Trump only got 20% of the vote. And so I think that's very interesting that Trump, first of all, is last, and Tucker Carlson got such a huge amount. Now, I personally don't think Tucker Carlson is going to run. I think he just doesn't seem the type that he want to upend his life like that. But I will say, of those three, I think Tucker Carlson is the one I would vote for. If you said you had to vote for one of these three, and by the way, when I do these Twitter polls like this, you don't have to comment and say, I wouldn't vote for any of the three. Nobody cares. The point is, which of these three would you vote for? And if you wouldn't vote for any three, just move along your timeline. You don't need to comment that I wouldn't vote for any of the three. Sorry, that's a pet peeve of mine. I just don't get why people feel like they have to add that. Just don't vote. Just move along. Anyway, though, of those three, I think Tucker Carlson would be better than Trump. And I think DeSantis might be better, but I prefer to have DeSantis in Florida, like I already said. So of those three, I would think it'd be great if Tucker Carlson was the GOP nominee. But I do not think he's running. I agree. Somebody in the chat said that, and I'm with them on that. And so that's the kind of the Republican. Now, there are other Republican candidates, but who cares? They're not going to do anything. I mean, what's Nikki Haley? I mean, nobody's voting for her. I saw Asa Hutchinson, I think his name is. I mean, I barely can remember his name. Nobody's voting for him. John Bolton, who basically wants to bomb every country he's ever visited or not visited. He's not going to be anything. So I think really we all know it's the Trump versus DeSantis if DeSantis decides to run. So I think, okay, I got to mention this because somebody made a comment in the chat. I want to show this. Max said, here, can I pull it back? We need someone to clean out all the acronyms. I assume he means like CIA, NSA, FBI, something like that. Trump has experience. Okay, I agree with that sentiment that we do need somebody to clean out the deep state. However, I'm not convinced Trump is that person because he had 4 years to do it and he failed miserably at it. Let's be honest about his 4 years there. He was great on Supreme Court nominees. He was decent on a lot of his foreign policy, but he picked terrible people for foreign policy. He picked some good judges, but he did nothing to drain the swamp. That whole talk about draining the swamp did not happen. And so I'm not convinced that he would actually be able to do anything. And here's the other thing. This is where I get very cynical about the whole system. I'm not convinced anybody could. If DeSantis became president, would he drain the swamp? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think, and with Tucker Carlson, probably not. I think basically all we can hope for is somebody who would not try to destroy us, frankly. Now, I would be remiss. So I talked about Democrats, Republicans. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about also the libertarian option. Now, I know I already see your eyes rolling, audience. I can just feel it. The libertarians, they're a joke. The Libertarian Party, nobody cares about them. It's some dude who's going to get up naked on the stage, or he's going to be completely a leftist and just want to, smoke his marijuana, and that's all that matters. I hear you. Audience. I know your skepticism. That being said, I've had a podcast about this before. The fact is, the Libertarian Party has made a turn for the better in the past year. They've basically been taken over by more true libertarians who understand that there is a culture war, and they do understand the importance of culture. For a long time, the Libertarian Party was dominated by figures who basically were liberals, who like to say they don't like government. They just didn't want to be called Democrats, but they supported Democrats on everything. And so I get, you're not going to, Gary Johnson, who cares? It's one of the most unimpressive people ever. Bill Weld was a candidate. He's not anybody either. Okay, somebody asked me about the American Solidarity Party. I'll talk about that in a second. I really do think the Libertarian Party has gotten a lot better, and I think they're a more viable third-party option. I get they're not going to win an election. But also, they have a guy, Dave Smith. I talked about him on somebody else's podcast about this. He's a secular Jew who has been historically a crude comic. So why would I support something like that? The fact is he's right on all the major issues, including abortion. He understands that abortion is murder, and he's pro-life. And he's very much against the deep state. He's very much against the woke regime, against COVID regime. He's against all the foreign interventionism. And so I think if he was a candidate for the Libertarian Party, I would seriously consider voting for him. It would depend, of course, on who the candidates are in the Democrat and Republicans, depend on other factors. What's the status of Ohio, where I live, things like that. But I would give him a shot. Dave Smith, if he runs for the Libertarian Party, or if there's another candidate, Libertarian Party, who's good, I would consider them. And so I really think, because of the fact that I think the size of the federal government is our major problem, it's the cause of so many of the other problems, and I think we really need to consider alternative options, people who are very much against that. And the libertarians, that's the one thing they are against. It's the size and scope of federal government. And actually, that's a reason. Let me take a step back. Donald Trump got in a lot of controversy this week because his spokesman said something about like he thinks that abortion should be back to the states, and some pro-life organizations really flipped out about this. I don't have a big problem with that, because the fact is, murder right now is at the state level. That's how the laws against murder are not federal offenses. They're state offenses. If I killed somebody tomorrow, it's in Ohio would take care of it. It wouldn't be the federal government that takes care of it. So I don't think it's like necessary. I think because of the history of abortion, I do think the goal should be a federal amendment that declares abortion illegal the entire pregnancy. That's just because of our history. But at the same time, I don't think it's like somehow you're not pro-life if you think that pro-life issue prudently should be with the states. So I actually don't knock Trump for that. I don't have a big problem with that. Because again, I think more power should be given to the states and less to the federal government. Now, Archer asked me, what is your opinion of the American Solidarity Party? I don't have a strong opinion about them. What I do know, I'm not a big fan of, because they seem to me to be very big government. Everything I've seen, now I could be wrong about how they feel, but the things I've read and the people I've seen who have pushed the American Solidarity Party, they basically seem like they're Democrats, but pro-life. And I just don't think that's the way forward. Like, considering I'm very much against big government, I'm not really for big government in our hands, because I think if you just increase the size of government, it's going to be abused against us. And I think history shows that's the case. So I'd rather decrease the size. So I'm not really supportive of the American Solidarity Party myself. I think probably the people involved in them are probably good people. And I'm not like ragging on them. I just think they're Democrats who happen to also be pro-life. And that's just not really the way forward in my mind. So, okay. So let me wrap this up. I've kind of gone long here. I think our goals, personally, I think the goal of Catholics should be decentralize, because I think the less power government has, the more we are able to practice our faith, the more we are able to spread our faith, to live our faith, first of all, just live our own faith without being persecuted, but also to spread it to others. And so I really think that should be our goal at all times in the political arena is decentralization. So more power to the states, and eventually, yes, I think leading to secession. Even if you don't think we should lead to secession, just a federalism, I'm with you. We're partners here. We'll partner up until we get a true federalist system where the states have power, and then we can talk about secession at that point. And so I really think that, I think we really should be working more local, and it's probably more important in many ways who your local sheriff is than who the president of the United States is. That's the reality. We saw with COVID, some sheriffs, for example, would not implement certain of the COVID restrictions. They wouldn't enforce mask mandates, things like that. Your life will probably be more impacted by your local sheriff or your local county officials than they will be by the president of the United States. That doesn't mean the president of the United States is unimportant. Unfortunately, he's too important. But the fact is I think we need to recognize that. And so I really think we need to act much more locally and do much more to support federalism and more importantly, support even secession at some point. Okay, so that's my ramblings about politics. I promise I probably won't do another solo show about politics for a while until some more stuff happens, unless something big happens. But I think as Catholics, we need to be thinking about this. And again, I just think that the long-term answer is less power to the federal government. And maybe the long-term answer is monarchy. I'll just leave that with you for there. Okay, until next time, everybody, God love you.